Bulavanaka, and good morning, ladies and gentlemen. The President of the Fiji Institute of Accountants, his council, and of course all the delegates here this morning. Talking about the future sometimes I think is a bit of an esoteric subject because it's generally seen to be the domain essentially of only the few, only the people in government who should be able to talk about the future and what the future holds. What I'd like to propose to you is that in order to build a strong government, a strong country more to the point, and a strong nation, and indeed to build a very solid foundation for economic growth and to expand our economic base and to have good commercial enterprise in a country, you need the input, you need that vision of what the future will be like, having the input of everybody. It includes the input of everybody in this room. It includes the input of everybody outside the room. It includes the buying in of that vision by the person who may be serving you breakfast this morning, to the person making your bed this morning, to a business leader, to a person sitting on the stage, to the young accountants. You may not know this, but ladies and gentlemen, approximately 70% of our population is below the age of 40. It's about 69.6, I think, from memory. 54% of that population is also below the age of 30. It obviously presents a number of challenges, but more so it presents a number of opportunities that we should be able to grasp as a country. You know, in many of our interactions that we've had with, for example, the accountants, with, for example, with the business community, we hardly see anybody below the age of 40 that interacts with us. I see those who are over the age of 40 probably in the first 4 rows. Those at the back are probably younger. Ulai probably is changing the average by sitting there. But the point is that we have the youth of our country, the young people of our country are not mainstreamed. And I think that is very, very critical. Because in order to be able to get that innovative thinking, in order to be able to meet those challenges that we meet, we classify it as a vulnerable economy, in the UN speak, in the IMF speak, in the World Bank speak. We are classified as a small island developing state, also in the UN speak. So the reality is that we have to realize where we are and what we can do to get out of that positioning that's been given to us. I think, Cyclone Winston is one of those incidences that we can use to highlight our vulnerability. Christchurch had an earthquake, a massive earthquake. Did it upset the entire country? No, it was Christchurch. There was a rebuild of Christchurch. But New Zealand still went along. I mean, their growth rates are smaller than ours, but the fact is they still have a solid economic foundation. They have a solid economic base. And so one event, one natural disaster, does not completely upset the economic balance within the country. In Fiji, and like many other countries in the world, small island developing states, or whether some particularly long landlocked countries, you can have one climatic event that can completely destroy the country, but more fundamentally, destroy the economy for decades to come. Now, if we had Winston going all over Fiji, wiping out this hotel, wiping out many of the resorts, what would have happened? What would have been our ability to engage in tactical marketing? You would have heard TAG, Tourism Action Group. How would we have brought the tourists back? What if all the major highways got washed away, followed by perhaps a tsunami? Where would we be? You see, this is the potential, and these are the issues that we need to think about in terms of one single event. This is why we call vulnerable economies. The reason why we are vulnerable is because our economic base also is not that wide. Previous governments, previous thinking, previous policy making, strategic thinking in government, in the civil service, in the private sector have all been very, very monofocused. It has not been outside the box. Tourism industry, we have accountants complaining, fix up the administration side, FERCA is terrible, company's office is terrible. That's the standard line that we get. Of course, there needs to be changes made to those institutions. But what original thinking has been provided by the private sector? What original thinking has been provided by civil servants? What original thinking is provided, or what platform are we giving people to have original thinking? To think outside the box. We have politicized ethnicity. We have politicized land. We have politicized the sugar industry. We give a racial tinge to almost everything. It has been happening. That's the standard practice. That's how some people actually survive politically. That's how some people actually survive commercially. But it is for very short-term gain. If you pick up any basic textbooks on developing a financial market, on developing an economy, you will allow the space to be able to have commercial and enterprise thinking in all spheres of the economy. Nothing is relegated or designated to be not touched. And that, unfortunately, ladies and gentlemen, has been the bane of our economy. A number of positive changes have been made, and I'm not saying this because I'm part of government or I was part of the government prior to the elections, but a fundamental change has taken place since 2007 in terms of making legal changes, economic changes. And that actually came home to the point. The reason I've got my phone here is last week I was in Washington and the IMF released some statistics that shows that if you look at the net Gini index, and if you compare the Fiji of 1990 to the Fiji of 2013, we are only 4 countries in the Asia-Pacific region where the inequality between the rich and the poor has decreased. That is a very critical aspect of understanding where we need to be. Countries like China, like India, Papua New Guinea, Singapore, Bangladesh, Cambodia, Indonesia, Vietnam, Australia, New Zealand, Japan, inequality in those countries, notwithstanding the fact that there has been economic growth, the inequality in those countries have grown. So just because you have a 6 or 7% growth rate, it does not necessarily mean that the benefit of that growth rate is going to everybody. So there is an unequal distribution of that growth positivity. And that, ladies and gentlemen, is one of the key issues that I like to talk about. Because in order to have a country that is highly successful and integrated, you need to ensure that you look after those people who are on the margins. In Fiji, we have had, in particular post-independence Fiji, in particular post-1990, an obsession and almost a compulsion to simply focus on, and perhaps a lot of it has been driven by countries or agencies outside Fiji, to focus simply on civil and political rights. But the rights of socio-economic rights have been marginalized. It is critically important to ensure that civil and political rights sit on the same platform of socio-economic rights. In fact, conversely, it's been the other way around, where we have only focused on civil and political rights window dressing, but have not at all addressed in a fundamental, tangible manner socio-economic rights. Rights to education, right to transportation, right to economic participation, right to housing, right to health. These are very critical issues. Ability to capture people in the social welfare network and bring them up to a particular level where they can compete in the traditional sense in the open market space on an equal footing. That's what many countries actually are failing to do. There is a focus on the macroeconomic perspective, looking at growth rates, but we must not forget that we need to be able to bring up people, whether they live in rural Fiji, maritime Fiji, whether they live in the squatter areas, what are the equal playing field aspects that we are addressing? Right to education, making education free. Because the reality is, ladies and gentlemen, if education is not free, as normal empirical evidence will tell you that the poor families won't be able to educate the kids as much as the people who are rich. So they will get the better jobs. They will get access to better education. They will get access to better incomes. And those people who are in the lower margins of society will continue to either stay there, stagnate there, or even fall deeper into that socioeconomic abyss. That, ladies and gentlemen, is very, very critical for us to understand. I'm not saying for us to become communists. I'm not saying we are being socialists in the traditional sense of the word. What I'm saying is that there is not just an ethical imperative, but it makes economic and commercial sense to look after people who are in the lower ends of the margins of society. Because that's what gives us the political drive. There are many people we have met in recent times who have come from very poor family backgrounds, who are now educated and are some of the best and the brightest. I met a young man who is from one of the maritime islands. Fantastic ideas. He would have probably languished there. The people in the urban centers, the elite, the well-connected would have benefited from the system, but somebody like him would have been marginalized. So it's very, very critical, ladies and gentlemen. And therefore, what is also critical, in order to be able to address such issues, we need to have a merit-based system. A merit-based system is critically important. Again, from a purely commercial perspective, forget politics. If you get the best person to do the job, your organization, your company, your accounting firm, your airline, your hotel will be able to deliver the best. It's very simple. If you hire the best waiter and he or she serves well, the person who's come to eat at your restaurant will come back again. I just came back from USA where they have to tip waiters, something that we are not used to. You tip up to 20% of your bill. You tip even taxi drivers, 10 or 15% or 20% of the bill. One of the reasons being is those people in those industries don't get paid well. So you have to make up for the tip. But the reality is that they actually go out and serve well because they want to get the tip. In the same way, if you are able to get the right person for the right job, you pay them well, you adhere to the standards, you will get much better efficiency and proficiency from that individual. So it makes very basic sense. Commercially, it makes a lot of sense. Financially, it makes a lot of sense. So this is why, for example, we have engaged a merit-based system that we rolled out in the civil service. Well, we get a lot of people complaining to us about the civil servants. We've been hearing for decades. Oh, they're useless. That's one extreme. They're not very good. They don't respond to phone calls. The question that we need to ask, are we in this culture of simply what I call the complaint culture? Or are we trying to look at how to fix it? There are some people who complain to you about civil service, but the moment you say to them, let's appoint people on merit, they suddenly get cold feet. Because for them it has wider implications. You can't have one and not have the other. If you want to fix up one problem, you got to look at the genesis of the problem, the reason why that problem exists in the first place. And ladies and gentlemen, that is very, very critical for us to think as a nation. For us as individuals to develop that way of thinking. We are caught of the many old ways of thinking. The CEO, your president, comes from Fijian Holdings, the CEO. He needs to give the best possible advice so he gets the best dollar return for his shareholders. He cannot give advice to his board based on other external factors. They need to appoint the best people for the positions in any of their companies, any of the subsidiary companies, not based on other external factors about whatever the case may be. And as we've said in the civil service, the moment you start appointing people on the basis of other than merit, so if I start appointing somebody because I come from Nanonga and I only get people from Nanonga, then the next thing will be what part of Nanonga you come from. What denomination do you belong to? Same way, if you appoint people on religion or ethnicity, even if you appoint people on ethnicity, then I've seen it. People then start saying, okay, what province? what dialect do you speak? So the whole system then crumbles, and there's no stopping to that. So your first denominator and the only denominator should be merit-based appointments. Ladies and gentlemen, when I was talking to your president, he had said to me to also address issues about, where do we see the future? Where do we see the various economic, contributors to the overall growth rates in Fiji? Where do you see it in 2025? There are many things at play at the moment in Fiji. Let me give you a few examples. And tourism is one critical aspect. Tourism contributes about 35% towards our GDP. It's a very important contributor towards our economy. It's the largest earner of our foreign reserves, remittances being the second one. Remittances about 30 years ago was not the second largest contributor. We now have rugby players sending money to us from France. We have people in the British Army. We have caregivers in the west coast of North America. We have nurses in the Middle East. We have security people working as security personnel in Afghanistan, Iraq, Kuwait, etc. They send money back home. We have now Fijians also working in other Pacific Island countries, whether they're working in banks or various other private sector organizations. There's obviously a potential for us to grow that. There's obviously an argument that when we better educate people, we want them to stay home. We want them to develop. If they cannot find jobs in their country, they can also go and work overseas in expatriates, and they can also send money back home. Sri Lanka has free education all the way up to PhD level. We love to be there one day. This is why we've got a lot of Sri Lankans in Fiji. They're well educated. They are not just in Fiji, but many other parts of the world too. So the reality, ladies and gentlemen, is these are some of the balls that are up in the air. The sugarcane industry, of course, is something that has gone through a metamorphosis, if you like. And unfortunately, unlike Mauritius, that was able to extricate politics out of the sugarcane industry, today it has reached a tertiary level of sugarcane production. The tragedy, I think one of the greatest tragedy in Fiji has been, we have been producing sugar from sugarcane for over 100 years, but we still did not, nobody had the vision to put a refinery. So we have this very silly situation. We export brown sugar, so typical third world country, basic exporter of commodities. But when you want something value added, we buy it back from the developing countries. So we send them brown sugar. When Coca-Cola wants to put sugar in their factory, when somebody wants to make biscuits in their factory in Fiji, when you and I want to eat white sugar in the hotel, guess where it comes from? Not from Fiji, it comes from overseas. But we had the ability to make that white sugar in Fiji. We had the ability to value add in Fiji. But we didn't do it. We simply did not do it. We politicized the land issue. We politicized the relationships between the farmer and the landowner for people's political gains, but commercially we lost out. Financially we lost out. Our ability to develop secondary markets, we lost it. There are many other aspects of our economy, ladies and gentlemen, that we are still just doing the same old thing. We're doing the same old thing, we're not thinking outside the box. Even unfortunately, I have to say, many of the input that we get from the private sector is also very limited. It's either very parochial, so some business people come and talk to you only about their business. Other professions will only come and talk to you about the problems that they face or their clients face. And I have to say, we have seen in some situations where certain professionals, and this is one critical issue I'd like to talk about, a sense of patriotism, which we should have a higher level, a heightened level by 2025, is that they will, some professionals, not all of them, some are very good, will do anything because their client requests it from them, to the point of becoming lackeys. So try and bypass the system, try and obfuscate issues because their client wants it. Not what is good for the country, not staying within the bounds of the law, but they will do that at any cost. Once you start doing that, ladies and gentlemen, you are then upsetting the rules of the game. Once you start doing that, you set a precedent where your country will financially and commercially lose out. So we all, as Fijians, must have a fundamental sense of loyalty to the nation, a fundamental sense of doing what is right for the country. That is very critical. You go to a country like Singapore. I have friends in Singapore. Even when I joke with them about Singapore Airlines not being, the service wasn't very good, they'll argue with me for half an hour. They actually at one other extreme. They cannot hear any criticism of their country, or they will be able to articulate it. These are just ordinary men and women. One of them is actually a designer for homes, but they will argue about it. I would sometimes, if I call them from overseas and then the call drops out and I said, oh, it's Singtel, not Vodafone. They say, no, can't be Singtel. Must be Vodafone, must be your company. I find it quite amusing. But the point is that they are so beholden to the idea of their country doing well. They're so beholden to the idea of ensuring that their country does not lose out. Ladies and gentlemen, we must develop that. We must have that. Some young people are developing that. We must be completely like that by 2025 if we can do that. Hopefully a lot sooner than that. It is very, very critical, ladies and gentlemen, because if we are able to focus on some of these 3 or 4 critical national issues, Fiji has enormous potential. I had one of the presidents of India, he had said that the youth, and this is I think President Azad who was a nuclear scientist, he said the youth of our country has more fusion power than nuclear energy. What he meant was that the youth of our country can provide that energy, that inspiration that perhaps we lack. And we must foster that, we must engender that. This is why it's very critical, the mentoring system is very critical in your profession. The ability to gain the ideas, extricate their ideas, get them to critically think. Our education system, of course, needs to think along those lines too. So to be able to think critically and to be able to think outside the box, ladies and gentlemen, is very, very important. And the moment you have a sense of what is good for the country, we will also be able to address many ethical and corruption issues. Corruption generally, ladies and gentlemen, has been seen as something untoward, to put in simple terms, that government does or a civil servant does. You have to have somebody that may bribe them. So you have somebody from the civil service and you have somebody from the private sector. But I can tell you, there's enormous amounts of corruption within the private sector itself. A lot of it. It may not be technically corruption per se under the crimes decree, but because at the moment FICAC's ambit is limited only to wherever you have state-owned enterprises or state-owned entities or related entities to the state. It happens all the time. In the hotel industry, there's a lot of talk, The purchasing officer always has the best house. You're laughing because you know that. It's a fact. It happens every day. When I worked for Colonial, one of the things that we found out when we wanted to set up a panel of lawyers, that there were banking officers who had relationships with only particular law firms. They did not like the idea of a panel. Even till today, yesterday I got a complaint about one person who's on one of the panels about how they are being marginalized by some bank officers because they've got a sweet deal happening with another law firm. Nothing to do with government, it's all in the private sector. These are everyday occurrences, ladies and gentlemen. But if everybody actually thought about what does it mean for your company, what does it mean for your government, what does it mean for your country, more to the point, then hopefully this level of and this type of behavior will be reduced. Ladies and gentlemen, I'd like to also talk about, which is very, very important, I believe, is climate change. Climate change is no longer just simply the talk of, in the diplomatic circles. Many of you who may be living in Suva or Lautoka may think, well, what's climate change going to do with me? You may read in the news about some village being moved to higher ground because you got water levels coming into the homes. Ladies and gentlemen, it's a very critical issue. The intensity and the frequency of climatic events are increasing. This is a reality. A country like Tuvalu, which is only 12 feet above sea level, in a few years' time, a few decades' time, can actually sink. You no longer will be above water. It's a reality. Northwest Viti Levu, when Winston went through it, some of the areas still don't have electricity. Why? Because we have electrical cables overhead. We don't have electrical cables underground. So as government, as a country, we need to think about when we are building back, when we want to what they call future-proof our nation from these type of climatic events. What do? Our priorities need to change. We may need to spend more money because we need to ensure when the next cyclone comes, those poles don't fall over again. Because the guy who's selling ice cream in Tavua town, the person who is buying fish as a middleman from fishermen in Ra and Tavua, etc., did not have electricity for a couple of weeks or more than 3 weeks to store the fish and sell it to other people. So he did not have an income. Very fundamental, but very much a real issue. I went to some people in Nandari and Ba. They have bore water. They extract water, drinking water from boreholes. But they weren't able to get the borehole water because there's no electricity to pump, to generate electricity for the pump. So they were without water. We sitting in Suva or Lotoka or some of the other towns do not realize this. These are everyday issues that affect people. So when we think as a nation about building back, we need to think about future-proofing. We need to think about that when the next cyclonic event takes place, that our economy does not stop. We do not lose jobs. We are able to recover very, very quickly. That the sewage pumps in Nandi and Ba actually continue to work even though we have a cyclone. These are very real issues. So climate change, ladies and gentlemen, we've now brought it to the forefront internationally of the Paris Agreement. You may say, what has it got to do with accountants? I can tell you it's got everything to do with accountants. Because all of you live in this country, first of all. You have access to those utilities, but there's a lot of money in climate finance too. Many of you do not know that. Many of you have not probably looked at even specializing in that area. One of the complaints that we have raised in the past couple of weeks is our inability to be able to access those funds. And we were at the side event on Monday, and somebody from KPMG did a presentation. They actually have a unit on climate change finance. I think this lady was from Britain. They have a unit now on future-proofing, on infrastructure financing. How many of you actually know about it? How many of you think about it? How many of you even have tried to read about it to be able to know, purely from a commercial perspective, how many of your accounting firms know that, hey, we can actually tap into this market? These funds, ladies and gentlemen, at the moment value to the value of about $2 billion US. Many small island states do not have the ability or the capacity within their state institutions to be able to access these funds. So we need to be able to partner with the private sector. So these are very real issues that you can actually help us, and we can work with you, as we have done with the Fiji Institution of Engineers. For the first time in Fiji's history, we've actually gone outside and got the Fiji Institution of Engineers to go and survey every single school that has been damaged. Please, I ask you to go to the adoptaschool.gov.fj. If you go there, if you click onto a school that's listed, there's 226 schools, you click on that, you will find, say, maybe a school in Ra. You will find a map showing where the school is located in Ra. You will click on the other icon and it will give you the entire report of the school done by the Fiji Institution of Engineers. Photographs, sketches, intermediate costs, long-term costs. You will get those costs broken down by each building, not even school, but each building. And then, of course, the best part is that you have a bank account where you can send the money to and show where you're going to adopt that school or that building. This has received a lot of positive feedback. But these are the kind of relationships that we are developing with the private sector. We want to develop these relationships with you. We need to disengage in that forum or that way of thinking where simply you come along to us and say, change this tax section, titles office not doing well, blah, blah, blah. Yes, that's important. But that's the only thing we get. They need to change that. We need to be able to get some new ideas. We need to be able to know, well, the tourism sector is not only about staying in the resort and lying on the beach and doing perhaps some jet skiing. There should be more to tourism. We need to be able to offer more activities, not just in the tourism sense, to be able to get more dollar retention in Fiji. That is very, very critical. So we need that new thinking. The other issue I think that is very important, ladies and gentlemen, is obviously the technological uptake. Technology really would help your business, would help us to be able to market ourselves to the rest of the world. Unfortunately, from our side, the e-governance projects, some of them have actually not as been fast as we thought it would be. We are currently carrying out a review through the World Bank because we had given some timelines where we wanted to have the titles office, the company's office completely online for you to be able to do searches and not have to send people down to the office and queue up. We are hoping that that will change very soon. But we've done other areas. Invest in Fiji, for example, is now online registration of investors. Each and every single member of a landowning unit now has been recorded, is digitized, which helps with the equal distribution of land lease monies. We also, of course, as you know, we have a bill before Parliament which will be debated next week, and the parliamentary committee on that has been meeting people. In fact, they're meeting some people this morning, which is the national switch. The national switch is very, very important, ladies and gentlemen. It is critically important. All the mainstream banks need to come on board for that. We have a ridiculous situation where we have banks like Bread Bank that have not been allowed to get into the big 3 or 4 people who now have various agreements with each other in the cost usage of the ATM machines. Bank of Baroda had been in Fiji for decades, but they weren't even allowed to be part of the ATM agreements between Westpac, ANZ and BSP at that time. Well, at that time it was colonial. These, ladies and gentlemen, must change. One of the reasons why it must change is because we must reduce the cost of infrastructure in Fiji. When in particular the outcome that you want through that infrastructure is service delivery. So if the banks have to spend a lot of money upfront with ATM machines as opposed to sharing the infrastructure, then the cost of the infrastructure will not be passed on to the consumer. At the moment, I think when you go and use your card in another bank's ATM card, your fees up to $1.50 a transaction, or $1.20. Average Fijian withdraws $10 or $20 in the ATM machine. If I'm going to withdraw $10 and I have to pay $1.50, that's more than 10% of the amount of money that I'm withdrawing. Should that cost be borne by the ordinary citizen? No. Should we not have an ATM machine in Korovislo? Should we not have an ATM machine in Yakov village? Of course we should. At the moment, the bank should argue, well, why should I go and set one up there? It's not enough people. But if you have shared infrastructure, if you're able to share the costs and work more on volume-based transactions as opposed to a reduced number of transactions, then obviously that system is not going to work. In fact, it has not worked. We will be able to then have more what we call real financial inclusion within the system. In the same way, we are now focusing on shared infrastructure for telecommunications companies. You can see sometimes some of those hills, you'll have about 4 or 5 towers. You don't need 4 or 5 towers. You need only one tower. And everybody can put their antennas on it. So the moment that they have to put up the individual towers, your call rate will increase. You have to pass on that cost. If they have shared infrastructure, we will have some parts of Kandavu that will have network coverage, or other parts of Fiji. Because at the moment, the cost base is too high as opposed to the return that they will get from that particular area. So there's no point putting an antenna or a tower where you only have, say, 20 people in a village, so they leave them out. But we want everybody to be connected. Because whilst technological uptake may be seen as a great equalizer, it can be the greatest disequalizer. If you have more people having access to very savvy technology and others are left out, it creates more inequality in society. So these are very critical issues, ladies and gentlemen, that we do need to think about. As I was saying that one of the other issues that I wanted to also talk about is in terms of the state-owned enterprises we have spoken. We have carried out a very successful divestment in the Fiji Ports Corporation Limited, where we have had the ability to get foreign buy-in or foreigners buying into shares, but bringing about a particular management or skill sets that does not exist in Fiji. But at the same time, we have not sold the family jewels. So those of you who may not have heard about it, what we essentially did was we sold the shares in the company, in Fiji Ports Corporation Limited. All the assets owned by Fiji Ports Corporation Limited was transferred to a wholly owned government entity called Assets Fiji Limited. And whatever then was required by Fiji Ports Corporation Limited was simply leased back to Fiji Ports Corporation Limited. The foreign investor is not necessarily interested in owning real estate. They want to make profit from your operations. So we are able to hold the assets to be completely 100% Fijian owned. We simply lease back those assets to FPCL, which is essential for the operations. And then we have a wonderful combination of Aitken Spence, which is a Fortune 200 listed company outside USA, about a 180-year-old company listed, with FNPF and the Fijian government owning 40%. We have similar divestment plans, of course, for Fiji Electricity Authority. At the moment, we have a number of interested parties that have been interviewed. I understand Fijian Holdings is one of them also. What we have also done, ladies and gentlemen, which is very critical to understand, we are a small economy. There are various disadvantages for having a small population because you do not have volume, you do not have economies of scale. So we have only one electricity company. It's not like we are competing electricity companies like in other bigger countries. We had a World Bank gentleman who came and he was trying to sell us the idea of, having this public-private partnership. They're funding and working with a New Zealand company to build another dam on top of Nandari Batu. And he was saying, if you do this deal, other people will come and you can, they'll come and invest furthermore in the energy sector. I said, no, they won't. Because he was using Kenya and Chile as an example. I said, look at the population levels, look at our population level. They're not going to make money. Only one company can operate. So in this process, you would have seen, we've called for expressions of interest. We not have called purely tenders, because tenders has a disadvantage in this particular instance. We have got Fijian Holdings, we've got 12 other companies, 7 of them are foreign companies that have put in expressions of interest. We've heard them all. We've now told them who the others are. They can go off and talk amongst themselves. They may want to make a proposal as a consortium. Some may bring capital, some may bring management skills, some may be able to bring in particular technology that does not exist in Fiji. So for us, it's getting the best deal out of such a process. It's not just simply about getting the highest dollar for the shares, but it's also about ensuring that we have longevity to that relationship. It's all about ensuring that we get efficiency, we get renewable energy being mainstreamed into our energy sector. We are at the moment also looking at AFL. So there's a misapprehension that by having a divestment of shares, it means that you will be selling the family jewels. No, it doesn't. You have to be clever about it. You have to be smart about it. And I think, ladies and gentlemen, that's one of the points that I like to make also. Again, it goes back to what I was thinking, and I like to quote. I normally don't like quoting people, but it's said by, again, the president that I mentioned. He said, thinking is the capital, enterprise is the way, and hard work is the solution. He also said at the same time, not the same time, but a different time, same person, for great men and women, religion is a way of making friends. Small people make religion a fighting tool. It's a very profound statement. It does not only apply to religion, ladies and gentlemen. It applies to ethnicity. It applies to socioeconomic thinking. We must be able to see ideology, we must be able to see thinking as a means of making bridges, as a means of providing solutions, as a means of improving our situation as individuals, as a country, and in particular those people who live in the socioeconomic fringes of our society. It should not be used as a means, as a fighting tool, to gain some kind of ascendancy, and only for a few people. So, ladies and gentlemen, I think the future of Fiji has, of course, a number of opportunities for us. We have to be able to, if I could leave you only with one thought, we have to be able to ensure that we harness the energy of the youth in our country. We have to be able to ensure that when we make contributions in the public space, that we are able to come up with new ideas, we are able to provide solutions, and we are not only monofocused. As a country, we need to be able to think on a multilateral basis, not simply on a unilateral basis. And that would be one of the ways that we will be able to address many of the issues that we face. As I said to also, a CPA gathering right here in this room, I think a couple of years ago, that there's some very basic things. We never hear an accountant, or some of you call yourselves business advisors now, who can actually come out into the public space and make an independent assessment of, for example, what the budget will be like, what the budget is, to be able to give the input. And unfortunately, it's not just only your problem, it's also the media. Because the media does not like to go outside the space that they've created only for one or two commentators. And even then, as a country, when we have somebody making a comment, some people, not all people now, and it's changing quite significantly, they'll say, oh, that person is saying that because they're of that ethnic group, or because they come from that province, or because I saw them drinking beer with somebody the other day, that's why they're saying that. That level of critical thinking, that level of professionalism, that ability to take a person's view simply because it is their intellectual input is something that we need to harness. We need to create that intellectual space, ladies and gentlemen. We need to be very critical in terms of how we address these issues. And only then we will be able to be on the trajectory. We're already on a trajectory, but we'll be able to fast track it. So I've reached the end of my time. I'm just looking at my watch. Ladies and gentlemen, I'd like to thank you for that. But a lot of people have said that when you actually open up new ideas, it may mean a loss of a person's cultural identity, of a loss of a person's religion, whatever the case may be. No, it does not mean that at all. If you are actually focused on those fundamental issues that I've highlighted, if you have a legal framework, for example, like a constitution that provides protection for your identity, then you have actually absolutely no issues. And there are many countries who have done that very successfully. And we need to break out of that mold. I urge you a very, very good conference. You've got some wonderful speakers. I had the opportunity of meeting some of them last night. And they have got some wonderful ideas. And I'm sure that you'll learn a lot from that. And I would like to very much, in particular, talk to many of you today. We have a budget that's coming up. As you know, that we have changed our fiscal year. The fiscal year will now be from the 1st of August till the 31st of July. Let me very quickly explain to you, rather than trying to read from other commentators, of the reasons for that. There are three critical reasons. One of them, essentially, as the gentleman from FERCA who is sitting here will tell you, that, as you know, the corporate tax is paid generally in September, December, and June, and its spillovers are paid in March. Generally, most companies pay their taxes due in December, and most of them actually paid on the 31st of December, on the last day. Now, technically, that money needs to hit government books by 31st. So when we stand up and say to you that our GDP, debt to GDP ratio, for example, will be 2.5 or 2.2, that calculation is done by taking into consideration the amount of revenue you'll get, the amount of debt you will incur, and the level of expenditure, both operating and capital. But what we have found, that for decades the practice has been that even though the money goes into FERCA and does not get transferred into government, they deem it to be government revenue. They deem it to be in the books of government, even though it has not actually technically hit government books. It's been practiced for decades now. We want to get away from that way of thinking. We received $64 million, $67 million on the 31st of December last year from government, from corporate taxes. While some of it went into government books, about $4 million actually was not cleared by the banks until the 4th of January. So for me to be able to stand up as Minister of Finance and say that I'm deeming it, it's incorrect for me to do that. It's a misrepresentation. So that's one of the fundamental reasons why that has taken place. The other second reason, of course, is that like many countries, we suffer from what we call Christmasitis. We go into holiday mode come November. All of you wonderful people send out cocktail invitations. A lot of civil servants go on leave. Many people go overseas. You deliver a budget in November, you probably pass it by the end of November, early December, and then you want all the civil servants to sit down together and plan next year our expenditure. It does not happen till March. If you look at government uptake of expenditure, in particular in capital infrastructure expenditure, it's very low. It peaks usually in the third quarter when everybody goes, oh shit, the year's about to end. Let's spend. So what does it do? It means people will try and get waivers so they can spend money. It means that people will try and cut corners. It means there's no good planning. That's one of the reasons. Second reason. The third reason, ladies and gentlemen, is of course, as I said, adaptation measures. Countries like Fiji and many other countries that have very, very low carbon footprints, in almost negligible, 0.004% of carbon emission is our contribution to the world output of carbon emission. Yet, we are the countries that are the cold face of climate change, of rising sea levels, of single climatic events that can completely destroy the economy. And we have our budget delivered in the middle of the cyclone season. We have our financial year starting in the middle of the financial season. You can have a wonderful budget, and you can have a winter that can completely destroy it. So this is why there are three key reasons, and this is why we've been talking to World Bank since January of this year, as we started the thought process in December last year. We've come up with August. We had looked at April the 1st. As you know, many countries have their budget delivered on April Fool's Day. Includes, UK actually I think probably was right on of that tag, so they had their budget delivered on 6th of April. But countries like India, New Zealand of late used to have their financial year start on the 1st of April. But New Zealand has recently changed it to the 1st of July. So April was also, in a way, an option that was looked at. It also fits in well with the tourism sector. Some of you may know that the tourism industry sets their rates for the year from the 1st of April. But again, April still falls within the cyclone season, and this is why you have the 1st of August as the new financial year. So the option was obviously we either carry the new year all the way up till August next year or July next year, or we cut this financial year short and then deliver the budget. So the budget, ladies and gentlemen, as we put a request to the Honourable Speaker of the House, we wish to deliver the budget on the 22nd of June of this year, for it to be then debated 6 days afterwards for the new financial year for 1st of August. We will be in the next few weeks talking to many of you. We really hope, and I sincerely mean this, we really hope we do not get only the same faces to come and make the contribution. Those of you who are partners in accounting firms and various other businesses, please talk to the younger members of your practices. They would probably have ideas that you do not have. And we hope to, in the future, be able to harness that information by having perhaps a targeted forum in which we can probably invite people below the age of 40 who are professionals and have a gathering of them, because we do want to hear from them. is again using one of the quotes that, you know, our youth should not be only job seekers, they should also be job creators. And the ability to do that, or to have that situation, is to be able to give that technology to them, that access of intellectual thought in that space, and the freedom to be able to make those contributions. Ladies and gentlemen, I thank you very much for your time. Good night.